Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari and today I am talking about Book of the Month Club. So if you live in the US of Canada or are on BookTube basically at all, you've heard of Book of the Month Club. So many content creators are sponsored by them. I am not at all, but I have been subscribed to them for a very long time. So what this is pretty straightforward. For $15 a month, you get a new release hardback. You get to choose between like 5 different books or so. I think it's 5 different books every month, and they're varying genres and either new release or like early release books. Now, paying $15 for a new release hardback is extremely cheap. So if you generally like to read from a bunch of different genres, Book of the Month Club could be for you. If you were somebody who's like strictly like science fiction fantasy, they put them out sometimes but not every month, so that might not be for you. But usually it's like a contemporary romance, historical fiction, thrillers. Mystery thrillers you usually find on there every month. So if you like books in those genres, you'll probably find something every single month. I don't have a problem finding something every single month, and I actually do read mostly science fiction and fantasy, so I don't know. I think it's a good deal. I know last year in June there was some controversy around Book of the Month Club where somebody called them out for releasing books mostly by white authors and not diversifying their selections. Book of the Month Club actually came out with like a apology in the way apologies should be done, where it's like, we have failed you. These are our fucking actionable items and how we are going to change. So not only did they say, this is how we failed, this is how we're going to fix it, keep us accountable. And for the most part, as far as I can tell, they have been very good about having diverse authors instead of just white authors. So from everything I can see, since June of last year, they have actively attempted to fix it and succeeded in attempting to fix it. So if you canceled your subscription back then, you might look back into them because they've fixed their problems. But back to the box itself. Again, you pay $15 a month. You can choose from 5 books. If you would like to skip that month because you don't like any books, you can do that, and they're not going to charge you until you like stop skipping it. And you can add an additional 2 books as an add-on for $10 each. So while you pay $15 for the first book, any additional books you get are $10, and that's even cheaper for new release hardbacks. So I think this is a great deal. I have subscribed to this book box for a couple of years now, and if you are interested and for some reason you're not subscribed and you want to support me, I do have an affiliate link. I do have a referral link down in the comments. It just gives me a free book, so you're helping support me. If you do not want to support me but you want to sign up, just go like Google search it. I'm not ever claiming that you have to support me. If you just feel like supporting me and giving me a free Book of the Month book, use my link in the description box to sign up. So you probably don't care what this book box is about anymore. You want to know what I'm reading this week, and I am here to tell you. Like every other one of these videos I'm doing this month, I'm going to do a minimum of 3 books. So the first 2 books right here, you probably saw on my TBR because I put both of these on my Dungeon of Books TBR. This is The Last Story of Mina Lee by Nancy Ju Yoon Kim, and this is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a contemporary, just general fiction, and this is young adult fantasy, I believe. It's new adult fantasy. I think it's like they're 16, 17, 18, so not like young. So I'm fine with like young adult where they're old enough or where they're like newly adulted. So 2 different genres, but these are both also by Asian authors, since May is AAPI month, so I would like to read Asian authors. This is by a Korean American author and this is by a Chinese American author. So 2 different Asian countries. So I'm excited to read these. Now for the 3rd book, it makes the most sense for me to choose this month's book of the month. So the book that I chose this month was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is a retelling of the Minotaur story, I believe, if I'm not entirely confusing my Greek myths, which is a huge possibility. Yeah. So for right now, we're going to say this is my TBR, and I will try to do a much better job of checking in as I read each one of these books this week. So I don't even know which one I'm going to read first, but I'm going to go start reading right now. So I'm going to decide here in a second. I'm just not going to decide on camera, and I'm going to surprise you by coming back in a few seconds for you and telling you about one of these fantastic books. Alright, so I just finished these Violent Delights, and I don't think I told y'all what this was about earlier. So this is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in the 1920s in Shanghai, and Juliet and Roma are both the heirs to rival drug gangs. And there is a monster in Shanghai that is killing mostly gang members. And this is kind of a second chance romance where Roma and Juliet fell in love with each other when they were like 15, and then Roma betrayed Juliet's family in a blood feud, and she got shipped off to the US for her protection and has only recently returned to Shanghai at the beginning of this book. So this book sounds like super intense and super action-packed, but somehow, even with that premise, this remains one of the most boring things I have ever read. And I don't know how you can make such a cool premise this boring. And it's not like nothing happens. Like, a lot of people die, there's a lot of guns, everybody's pulling guns on each other, there's fights all the time. You kind of have like a miscommunication romance type thing with Roma and Juliet, though not really. And it's even so boring that the miscommunication didn't bother me, which says a lot because that is my least favorite trope. But yeah, it's just boring. I don't know how. Like, I cannot explain this book. Overall, it's a 3-star because there's nothing wrong with it. I was just bored reading the whole damn thing. Like, I literally can't explain how this book works at all. So we're just gonna move on, say that this was fine, but it was real boring. And I am going to read, and I'm going to read Ariadne next, and I'm going to read Ariadne next. Ariadne? I don't know. Okay, anyway, this is a Greek myth retelling of the Labyrinth story, I think. I think I said that earlier in this thing. That's all I know. I could be completely wrong on what Greek myth that is, but we're just gonna go with it. This one's fairly short. Hopefully I can be back soon and talk about it. Alright, I'm back and I finished Ariadne. Now, this is a 3-star, but it's like the higher end of 3-star. Like, I enjoyed it, I just didn't like love it, and it's not gonna like stick with me for any significant amount of time. So what this is a retelling of, you know, Ariadne's story, which starts with like the Minotaur story and Theseus defeating the Minotaur and everything, because that's like where you first hear about Ariadne, but she goes on later in life to marry Bacchus and have children with him. So it's like her life across like multiple different myths, and There's also her sister who ends up marrying Theseus, and you have her story as well. So this is the kind of feminist retelling of a misogynistic story that I think is done well, where in a lot of like feminist stories they like beat you over the head with misogyny, which I'm just not interested in reading about because I mean I deal with misogyny on a daily basis. Like why the fuck would I want to read an entire story about misogyny? So this one it more focuses on the women and the background is the misogyny. And so you have these like well-known Greek myths, and while it focuses on Ariadne and her sister Phaedra, I'm gonna say it's Phaedra, you hear about like other women who were affected by misogyny, basically like Greek myth misogyny. So it's a really interesting twist to all of these really well-known stories. And this is a retelling in the sense of it's like the exact Greek story just from a different perspective, if that wasn't clear already. But in the end, I'm not a huge like fan of Greek mythology. I have a basic understanding of it, but I'm not like, oh my god, I love Greek myths. I want to read about all the Greek myth retellings. I'm just like, oh yeah, I've heard of that before. So while I appreciate it and while I thought it was good, it's not for me. So if you're really into Greek myths and you want feminist retellings of Greek myths, I think this would be great for you. It's also very short, so very easy to get through, really well written, really great storytelling, just not a subject matter that I'm like hugely enamored with. That's its only flaw, is it just wasn't for me. I'm off to my final book now. This will be the final book because it's Saturday already. I've had tournaments all week, so I have been I worked all last weekend, I worked all this weekend, and I've been working 10 to 12 hour days every day because of the tournament, so I haven't had like a huge amount of time to read. So we're ending it with this one, and I will be back as soon as I'm finished reading it. Hello, let's close this out with a DNF. And it's not that I just hated this book. I was just bored out of my mind, and I keep finding excuses not to read, which says something because this is what I'm reading. So with that in mind, yeah, I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna DNF this. I got about 150 pages into it, and I'm gonna tell you like what it's about and like what my issues with it are so far. So this book is like a dual perspective timeline. You have the perspective of Mina Lee in the late 1980s. She is a Korean immigrant in Los Angeles, in Koreatown in Los Angeles, and she decided to leave Seoul and come to America because her husband and daughter were killed in an accident, and she just can't like deal with seeing things that remind her of her husband and daughter. So she's like, let's leave the country. And she does. And it's kind of like so far her like struggle in America, just being an illegal immigrant. And then the other timeline is her daughter Margot, and this is not the daughter that died, obviously. Different daughter, her daughter Margot, who comes to visit her mom and finds her mother's dead body on the floor of her apartment, and she had died like a week earlier or something like that. And then you have like Margot's struggles trying to figure out like what happened to her mom, and like just kind of like reminiscing about her childhood. So the storyline that I have the most problem with is Margot's, for two reasons. One, she's like trying to figure out who killed her mother, but there's like no evidence that anything happened other than her mother tripped, hit her head, and died. So in like the police ruled it as an accident. There's nothing that says her mother was killed, like at all. But yet Margot's like determined that her mother was killed. Her mother's even like an elderly woman. She's got to be in her like 70s. So not like super old, but not like in her 40s. So it's just like, what are you talking about? Every time I read about this like investigation that she's doing. And then from every instance that we can see about, like either from Mina's perspective or Margot's perspective, Mina was a wonderful, caring mother who revolved her entire life around Margot. And Margot is nothing but an ungrateful, hateful bitch. And she has spent her entire life treating her mother like shit for no reason. Like, her mother seems fan-fucking-tastic, but she spent her entire life treating her mother like shit. And then now only feels bad about it because her mother is dead. But she's never made any attempt to be nice to her mother, seemingly in her entire life. And I don't like that. She's not a character that I can root for in any way at all. And while I root for Mina, like, I already know that her daughter's a bitch to her, and that's not going to get better anytime in her entire life. And then what's going on in her life in the 1980s just isn't entertaining in any way. Like, I'm not getting anything special from it. So, I don't know. I just don't know. Like, I don't care is what I'm getting at in this book. And I love immigrant stories, so I think it's just like this particular book. So I'm just gonna set it aside, move on to something else instead of continuing to struggle through something that I'm not enjoying in any way, shape, or form. So what did we learn from this book box? I suck at picking books for myself too, apparently, since it was like a 3-star, a 3-star, and a DNF. Huh. And I picked all these books out for myself. So it's not like they're sending me blind books. I don't know. I'm not gonna cancel it because I still like a majority of books that I get from this book box. It's just this go through did not turn out very well for me. So, oh well, I guess. Anyway, next week I am doing a sci-fi club book box where I get 2 books a month that are both fantasy, because it's called the Sci-Fi Book Club book box, but you could choose sci-fi or fantasy, and I chose fantasy. So I'll be reading a bunch of fantasy books next week, so definitely tune in for that if you were interested in the last book box that I'm going to be covering. But thank you for being here. Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Bye!